Chapter 3 Haille Hillbourne.
When a wolf is alone, separated from his pack, he's two things,
Said the trapper.
lost and mad.
Lost and mad,
The shortish man with jug ears and flat nose said, waving his arms and clawing at the air with his fingers to the delighted shrieks of the children. Haille was not delighted. He was not even scared like most of the Antons gathered in the bell yard down at the bottom of Castle Hill. Nor was he relieved, as many of the farmers stepping over muddy wagon ruts must have felt seeing the wolf caught and caged. Its foreleg was nearly broken in two by the trap that had snapped close on it. The skin peeled back to reveal shiny bone. The animal was mad with pain, snapping its jaws loudly and crashing its teeth up against the bars of its cage. A few brave boys Haille's age poked at it with sticks. The trap dragged heavily as the wolf lunged at them, its eyes wild, senseless. Afraid. It was difficult for Haille to name exactly what he was feeling as he watched the crowd let the boys taunt the wolf. He felt as if a poison infiltrated his body, filling his organs with a dark, unpleasant stickiness, just like the filth that flowed in the unpaved city streets. Foul, malodorous filth. The feeling only grew stronger with each jab on the part of the boys. One succeeded in stabbing the end of his stick in the eye of the wolf, leaving a red, weeping socket. The trapper, a thick man with a beard shaved into a point that reached just the tip of his chin, chased the boys away as he and his companions, other fierce-looking hunters and trappers, converged on the cage with long spears. The wolf turned its attack towards them, its gums bloody and teeth breaking as it threw itself against the bars with wild growls. With little fanfare, the trapper with the pointed beard lowered his spear and caught the wolf in the chest on its next lunge. The growls turned into a yelp that echoed in the bell yard. The sight of the creature hung up on the spear brought the crowd to cheers. The trapper held a hand up in triumph, leaving only one on the spear. The wolf was not finished. It twisted to the side, pulling the lance with it. The handle wanged against the bars and knocked the trapper over into the mud. The people gasped as he fell close to the cage. His jug-eared assistant offered him his hand but found it slapped away. The trapper nodded to the other men, and they all stabbed their spears through the cage. The animal's countenance changed from fierce to fearful as one blade after another tore its flesh. The wolf was overcome and stumbled, its legs scraping the bottom of the cage as it twisted against the spears. Blood was not only on its leg but matted in its fur now, its one remaining eye cast down at the ground. It moved as best it could on its three good legs to shake free, but it only brought itself to the leader, who with a red face and porcine nostrils opening wide, drove his spear into the wolf's throat. The final blow twisted into the animal's neck, tenting the skin on the far side before the red blade burst forth. The wolf collapsed, its chest heaving. The crowd was in a frenzy. One could have been forgiven for thinking a cadre of knights had just returned from battle tossing out coin and treasure. The spoils of war. That would have been a reason to celebrate. Haille felt sick, and even worse, in this feeling, he knew he was alone. He had already turned back up Lancel Way when the bell tower was striking 1:45. The midday break was nearly over and he had to steel himself for another half-day of tutelage alongside other students. Students of rich merchants, noble families, and high houses. Students who would never let themselves be seen among such commoners that packed the bell yard. Not that they would be welcome. Haille had stuffed his own academy surcoat into his satchel. It would be wrinkled when he put it back on at the academy house, but he did not care. He could hardly make Master Catham or Madam Havisham like him any less. He already had shown them contempt by drawing in his notebooks, arriving late, and wearing riding breeches under his surcoat. And if they knew where he went during his breaks, they would have been even more contemptuous. It did not matter. He had never felt much fellowship from those lucky enough to sit above the salt at the table, so he did not waste time worrying about them. They could be packed in a cage, taunted and stabbed for all he cared. He valued his noonday wanderings for the very fact that they drew him down the hill from the castle and the high streets to where he was unknown. To where other boys of 14 years wore breeches patched at the knees and hawked in the streets or cleaned in the taverns, or if unlucky enough, worked in mines. Down the hill in the vicinity of the bell yard he could disappear and no one knew him as a Hillbourne. He was still feeling miserable. It was a cloudy day and the timbers of buildings were darkened from morning showers, deep puddles among the cobblestones of the high streets. But it was not the weather that had him ill at ease. He actually favored the briskness of autumn, the turning of leaves, and the clearing of fields for harvest. He liked to see the hay bursting out of the windows of barns and the gourds carved into faces of gods and lit from within with candles that families would set on their doorsteps for the harvest moon festival. He even welcomed the rains of winter, for they kept others indoors and left the outdoors more open to him to explore. For some reason he had always preferred a rainy day to a sunny one. Thunder and lightning was all the better. No, it was the slaughter of the wolf that still unsettled him so, even if he did not know why. Perhaps only because it had been so violent, the animal suffering so prolonged. He considered it a waste of a good woodland creature. Damn the farmers if they grazed their flocks too close to Worthern Forest. Whatever the case, his usual break from the unpleasantness of Academy House had been ruined. Haille caught sight of another sky-blue surcoat with the gold insignia of a key and torch on the front and back and groaned. A fellow classmate. He could not identify whom exactly, for the hood was up, but Haille thought it best to act preemptively. When his classmate passed him at a sprint, not taking notice of him, Haille put out his foot and tripped him. He let out a harsh laugh as the younger student spilled forward onto the cobblestones. With a loud huff, the air forced out of his chest. Haille felt no regret. After all, the likelihood that even this smaller underclassman had thrown melon rinds at him, called him an invalid or imbecile, or found some other way of humiliating him was high. He kept walking and only stopped when he glanced back and realized his mistake. He was a she, and not an underclassman at all, but someone from his own class. Caitlin Barnes. Somehow he had picked the one student who likely never had teased him. "Damn it, Caitlin, I'm sorry," he said, reaching down to help her up. Her hands were raw and scraped, and she yanked them out from his reach. At first he thought she was just afraid of catching the shaking sickness from him. But when he saw the hurt in her face, he knew she was not scared, but angry. Her eyes were gray, in such a way that reminded him of the coat of the wolf he had just seen slaughtered. Her hair was a russet brown, like dried blood. "Caitlin, I'm sorry. I thought you were somebody else," she said, wheezing slightly as she picked herself up. "Anybody else. I just sometimes have to stick up for myself. It's a constant struggle between me and the other kids." "Of course, I know. I've heard them," she said, standing, rubbing her hands on her dress, a homespun wool one with patches. The same one she wore every day. Haille was seized with an idea. He reached into his satchel, removed a gold capinha, and held it out to her. As soon as he saw her face, he regretted it. "Take it," he said. "I don't want to flash it around on the street like this." Not only did she not take it, but she struck his hand, knocking it to the ground where it rolled, wobbled, and plunked into a puddle. The face of the founder of Antis, Haille's own ancestor, Haille Hillbourne, glared back at Haille, distorted, and shadowed by floating bits of dirt and grime. When he looked up, Caitlin was already running again. "Avenger Red, the vigilante of the Eastlands, frees 24 more child slaves from dastardly slavers," the news crier outside the academy yard called out just as Haille returned. At least there is some good news, he thought, stepping through the gate and into the academy's courtyard. He would have remained to listen for more details on the city's favorite vigilante, but the crier had already moved on to the news of the fearsome wolf that had been put to death in the bell yard. Haille straightened his surcoat over his shoulders as he stepped over the chalk drawings scratched into the flagstones by the youngest children. He passed a few children on punishment who had been ordered to sweep the doorway of dust, an unending task, and made his way to his classroom. He was late and had hoped to slip in the back without being noticed. But Madame Havisham was standing in the doorway berating Caitlin Barnes. Her head bowed, her eyes to the floor. "You are late! Your cloak is dirty, and your hands are unsightly. This is not what is expected of a lady." Ladies didn't wear wool dresses with patches either, but Madame Havisham knew that could not be helped. Everyone in the school knew Caitlin was an orphan but a generally good student. Haille did not want that ruined on his account. His standing as a miscreant was already firmly established. "She's late because of me," he said. "I tripped her." Madame Havisham pursed her lips, her eyebrows like bushy caterpillars lifted up on her face. "Well, such behavior is hardly fitting for a prince." "I understand," Haille said, more amenable than usual. Madame Havisham's eyebrows rose even further, so unused to Haille's cooperation. "Well, your mantle is a wrinkled mess." "I'll agree to do any lines you expect of me," he said, walking to his seat in the back row. He pulled his chair out with his foot and settled down into it. Madame Havisham followed him. He would not escape her fury so easily. "Truancy is one thing, bullying another, but frankly I find your careless attitude most objectionable, Mr. Hillbourne. No, in this case I think I'll be calling on Lady Yonasail for a discussion after tutelage today." Haille's throat fluttered and he slumped down in his chair. Lines he was used to. Sweeping the courtyard, carrying wood, and hauling water too. But calling on Yana was different. He did not like to disappoint her, and he knew that this time she would be upset with him. Martin Forts snickered at Haille from the front row but quieted the moment Madame Havisham turned her head. Haille, picking up his quill and starting his lesson, wished he had tripped Martin instead. His day only got worse at 3 when his class crossed the campus to Reed Hall and Haille found his trunk broken into and his practice sword snapped in half. He stared at the 2 pieces laying across his pads, aware that his classmates dressing just behind him were likely the ones to have broken it and were watching him for a reaction. Could have been any of them. Could have been all of them. It was a sight he'd grown used to. It was like so many other little humiliations, like the word cripple scratched onto his desk, or children grimacing and shaking behind the teachers' backs, imitating him during one of his episodes. Except that breaking his practice sword stripped him of the one joy that he looked forward to in the day. It was in the fencing ring where he could free his mind and compete with his classmates on a level playing field. He closed the trunk slowly, careful not to slam it, and walked out of the changing room. No one said a word, not even Martin Forts, which was for the best, for Haille's restraint was at a breaking point. Haille was first to take a seat on the edge of the ring, without pads. He clenched his jaw and willed himself not to cry when Ivan Greenwolf, the sword instructor, knelt down beside him. Haille looked away. Ivan was one of the only allies he had in the academy, and his sympathy might be the soft point that would break down Haille's defenses. Ivan must have realized this and punched his arm hard. "No pads, Mr. Hillbourne. Should I punish you?" "I'm already doing lines after class today." "You should have excellent penmanship by now." Ivan gave a slight smile. "Should. Maybe I will make you run sprints. Go change." "My sword is broken." Haille just stared at the ground. "You need a better lock." "I'll say." The first of the other boys was emerging from the changing room. "I think we will run sprints today," Ivan said. "They'll be sorry they got you kicked out of class." "What am I doing instead?" "Go help teach the younger classes. Go now, so the other boys don't see you moping." Haille couldn't suppress a smile. There was some justice in the world after all.